Now we're going to talk about sampling. Here's showing a breakdown of population and what the population truly means. So the population is a group of people or objects that we're interested in studying. It can also be called a reference population. The units of a population are what we are counting. So this could be people, it could be households, it could be counties, it could be lab samples, as well as many other things. Most of the time in this class we'll be talking about people, but if you're working for the CDC, you may worry more about households as opposed to the individual person. Then populations are described by parameters. So these are descriptive statistics for populations. For a continuous variable such as age, the mean and average for a population and the standard deviation around a mean for the population are categorized by these two Greek symbols. So they look a little different than what you'll see when we're using samples, which is the majority of the time. Next, a similar breakdown for samples. So a sample is the subset of the population. It's collected from the population because the population is either too large to study or it's hard to get information from everybody in the population. Samples allow us to make inferences about the population based on the results of the sample. Samples use statistics in order to describe the sample population, the sample characteristics. For a continuous variable like cholesterol, the x would meet the mean or average for a sample, while S or SD is the standard deviation around that mean for the sample. Why does the sample need to represent the population? Generally, it avoids known and unknown biases. It also helps us convince other people that the study was done correctly and provides a basis for our inferential statistics because it lets us make accurate inferences about the population. So here's an example. If we're looking at asthma patients, and we have a population of 3,579 people that are age 21 and above that have a diagnosis of asthma. We're going to conduct a random probability sample. We'll get to those later, but we're going to conduct this random sample, and we get a total of 1,200 individuals that we contact to see if they're interested in participating in our study about asthma. After we contact them, there's approximately 950 that get back to us and say that they're willing to participate. That would be our final sample. So that's how we go from the population to the sample to the final sample. Next, we'll talk a little bit about sampling methods. So probability sampling is when every study unit of the population, the people, the households, the schools, has an equal chance of being included in the sample. This eliminates a lot of sampling bias because the segments of the population are not over or underrepresented. So we want to use these sampling methods if we are trying to generalize our information from our sample back to the broad population. But best practice is to not only use a probability sampling method to find a representative sample, but to run a power analysis to determine the sample size needed for sufficient power to detect differences between groups, if they truly exist in the population. For more about sampling methods, you can look at this socialresearchmethods.net site. They have really great information there. And then next is some non-probability sampling methods. These are non-representative sampling. So it's sampling with a purpose. So maybe a modal instance. So we're sampling the most frequent or typical case in a population. Or experts. So maybe the people who know the most about an area. So key informants. Or a quota sample. So we sample until we get maybe we're looking for 100 female opinions about some new product. So we would then only collect information from the women until we reach 100. Then heterogenic samples would be sampling for diversity, most often used when you're exploring an area for the first time. Snowball sampling is when you identify people who meet the inclusion criteria for your study and then ask them to recommend others that they know who meet the criteria also. This is good for hard to reach samples, such as potentially HIV clinics, if you're trying to sample HIV individuals, if you're looking at prostitution and you want to measure how prostitution, those who participate in that, how their health differs. You may know one individual who works with them in health, so you may approach them to ask people they know to participate in your study. And then non-purposive sampling would be sampling without a purpose. So this is convenience sampling, to whomever it's easiest to capture. This would be like me standing outside of the Wawa and just collecting information from anyone who passes by who is willing to answer a few questions. That's not going to represent the population, but it's going to represent some people that live in that area.